From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
This isn't just a bad trade agreement. This is a one-percenter power tool that could rip up our basic needs and rights.
As the federal government shutdown continues, Secretary of State John Kerry heads to Asia for secret talks on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Critics describe it as NAFTA on steroids. Then President Obama is about to break a new record. In a few weeks, the number of undocumented immigrants deported since he took office will surpass 2 million. On Saturday, immigrant activists have called for a national day for dignity and respect in more than 100 cities nationwide. Then we'll speak with Max Blumenthal, author of the new book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama's canceled his trip to the APEC summit in Indonesia amidst a federal government shutdown that's now in its fourth day. Republicans have continued to insist on defunding or delaying Obama's health care law as a condition for funding the federal government. Lawmakers are also facing a looming deadline of October 17th to raise the nation's debt ceiling or risk default. According to the New York Times, House Speaker John Boehner has told colleagues he is determined to pass a debt limit increase, but he's previously said the hike should be tied to spending cuts. House Republicans have scheduled a vote on a bill sponsored by some top Democrats to provide missed pay to 800,000 federal workers furloughed under the shutdown. Meanwhile, a Republican congressmember is attempting to walk back a controversial statement about Republican motives for the budget fight. Indiana Republican Marlin Stutzman told the Washington Examiner Republicans, quote, have to get something out of this, and I don't even know what that is. Stutzman later said he had, quote, carelessly misrepresented the debate. President Obama referenced Stutzman's remarks during a speech at a construction company in Maryland.
If you're working here, and in the middle of the day, you just stopped and said, you know what, I want to get something, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to get, but I'm just going to stop working until I get something, and I'm going to shut down the whole plant until I get something. You'd get fired.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and fellow Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul were caught on tape chatting candidly about strategy for the shutdown. After finishing an interview with CNN, Rand Paul approached Senator McConnell, who was waiting for another interview, not realizing the microphone was on and the tape rolling. Listen carefully.
And I just go over and over again, we're willing to compromise, we're willing to negotiate. I don't think they poll tested we won't negotiate. I think it's awful for them to say that over and over again.
Yeah, I do too. And I just came back from a 2-hour meeting with them. And that was basically the same view privately as it was publicly.
I think if we keep saying we wanted to defund it, we fought for that, but now we're willing to compromise on this, I think they can. And we're going to. I think. Well, I know we don't want to be here, but we're going to win this, I think.
That was Kentucky Senators Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell. Senator McConnell is in a tight race in his home state of Kentucky. Lawmakers debating the budget faced a lockdown at the Capitol Thursday after a woman with a 1-year-old child in her car reportedly attempted to ram through a White House security barrier, sparking a car chase past the Capitol before police shot her dead. The child survived. A Secret Service officer and a police officer were injured. The driver is believed to be Miriam Carey, a dental hygienist from Stamford, Connecticut. Carey's mother said she was suffering from postpartum depression. The Capitol Police who responded and those injured are among the hundreds of thousands of workers being forced to work without pay under the shutdown. In the Gulf Coast, residents are bracing for the arrival of Tropical Storm Karen, which could bring bracing winds and more than 8 inches of rain. A hurricane watch is in effect, and governors in Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi have declared states of emergency. The White House says at least some FEMA workers are being recalled from furlough to cope with the storm. At least 130 African migrants have died after a boat bringing them to Europe caught fire, capsized, and sank off the coast of Italy's Lampedusa Island. More than 100 bodies have been recovered and 150 people rescued, while some 200 are missing. The migrants are reportedly from Eritrea and Somalia. A spokesperson for the UN Refugee Agency called the incident appalling.
Our thoughts right now are with the families and the people affected themselves, but you have to think of the tragedy that lies behind this, which is that these people, many of them are likely to have been fleeing war, fleeing persecution, fleeing human rights abuses in their own countries. So this is a tremendous tragedy of multiple layers.
United Nations weapons inspectors say they've made progress toward dismantling Syria's chemical weapons under a UN mandate that calls for the total elimination of the arsenal by mid-2014. UN spokesperson Martin Naserki said the team is hoping to begin on-site inspections and the initial disabling of equipment next week if certain conditions are met.
The joint team from the United Nations and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has made encouraging initial progress following the first working day of meetings with Syrian authorities. Documents handed over yesterday by the Syrian government look promising, according to team members, but further analysis, particularly of technical diagrams, will be necessary, and some more questions remain to be answered.
The U.S. will begin flying long-range Global Hawk spy drones from a base in Japan under a deal to expand military ties. The surveillance flights will begin next spring and primarily target North Korea. The deal also includes construction of a new radar system and the use of P-8 anti-submarine planes in Japan, reportedly marking the first use of the aircraft outside the United States. Just days after he was released from prison following nearly 42 years in solitary confinement, dying Angola 3 member Herman Wallace has been re-indicted by a Louisiana grand jury for the 1972 murder of a prison guard. Wallace, who's dying of liver cancer, was released Tuesday into the arms of his supporters after a judge overturned the original conviction, saying women were wrongly excluded from the jury. Wallace and Albert Woodfox, who remains in prison, were convicted of murder without any physical evidence and despite the fact that a bloody fingerprint at the scene was not theirs. They say they were targeted for their Black Panther organizing, along with a third member, Robert King, who was eventually released after being held for a different crime he did not commit. Wallace has served more time in solitary confinement consecutively than any other U.S. prisoner. District Attorney Sam DeKilla said a date will be set by the end of the year for him to appear in court again. He told the New Orleans Advocate, quote, "I say he is a murderer." Wallace's legal team said in a statement, quote, "We are shocked that a state grand jury was asked to indict a man who only has days to live." To hear our full coverage of the Herman Wallace and Angola 3 case, go to our website at democracynow.org. California Governor Jerry Brown has signed a bill allowing undocumented immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. 10 other states have passed similar laws, many of them in the last year. The measure drew wide support from police officials and insurance companies, as well as immigrants' rights groups. In Texas, Democratic State Senator Wendy Davis has officially launched her candidacy for governor. Davis captivated the country when she rose to her feet in pink sneakers for an 11-hour filibuster to try to block an anti-choice bill in June. She made the announcement Thursday outside Fort Worth in the same arena where she received her high school diploma.
All of you deserve to have your voices heard, because our future is brightest when it's lit by everyone's star. And that's why today I am proud to announce my candidacy to be the 48th governor of this great state.
A U.S. grand jury has indicted 13 members of the hacker group Anonymous for launching cyber attacks on an array of websites as part of a campaign for transparency and free access to information. Among other targets, the group's accused of attacking credit card companies that block payments to WikiLeaks and targeting film industry groups in retaliation for the shutdown of the video file-sharing website, The Pirate Bay. Russian prosecutors have charged the remaining 16 people from the Greenpeace ship Arctic Sunrise with piracy following their arrest last month. All 28 environmentalists and 2 journalists who were on board the ship are now facing up to 15 years in prison after some of the activists tried to board Russia's first Arctic offshore oil rig. On Saturday, tens of thousands of people in more than 80 cities are expected to participate in a global day of solidarity calling for the release of the Greenpeace prisoners. To hear Kumi Naidu, the Greenpeace International Executive Director, go to democracynow.org. Ecuador's parliament has approved plans to drill for oil in parts of the Amazon rainforest following the failure of a plan by President Rafael Correa to have wealthy countries pay to preserve the Yasuni National Park. The park has been designated by UNESCO as a biosphere reserve because of its vast biological diversity. And there are reports a former U.S. Navy officer suspected in the killings of 2 Americans during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet has died in Santiago. Believing he was living in Florida, Chile's Supreme Court approved a request for the extradition of Ray Davis last year so he could face trial for the 1973 murders of journalist Charles Hormann and student Frank Tarugi in the days after the U.S.-backed coup that ousted Salvador Allende on September 11, 1973. At the time, Davis commanded the U.S. military mission in Chile. But while Chilean authorities sought his extradition, Davis was reportedly living secretly in Chile. Author Peter Kornbluh told the Associated Press, quote, "They were working to get Davis extradited, and he was literally less than a couple of miles down the road," unquote. A death certificate says Davis died in Santiago on April 30th. The U.S. Embassy says it found out about Davis's death in May and that it did not know he was living in Chile. Speaking on Democracy Now! Last month, around the 40th anniversary of the coup, Charles Hormann's widow, Joyce, described how her husband was brought to Santiago by Ray Davis just days before he was arrested by Chilean forces and then executed.
He was brought back to Santiago, to the search and destroy mission that was Santiago at that time, by the head of the U.S. military group, who had come through blockades to get to Viña del Mar to see his military people in Viña. And then, because they had asked him if he would give a lift to Charles and Terry back to Santiago. His name is Captain Ray Davis. And he is an extraordinary figure in our story.
Joyce Hormann told the AP she wants additional proof from the U.S. that Ray Davis is actually dead. After 40 years, she said, this is extraordinarily frustrating. To hear Joyce Hormann on Democracy Now!, go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.